Hello everyone, this is the Educated Conservative here, and I have something that is very disconcerting today. It has to do with teaching social justice inside science courses. Now, it's already bad enough that we actually have classes at the college level that purely teach social justice. But now, they are trying to get these ideas implemented in science classes, which is the last place where they belong. I have seen arguments made for implementing them in sociology classes, history classes, so on and so forth. But science is based on empiricism. It's based off of testability. And teaching social justice values in a science class, it should be clear that it has absolutely no place. Now, this first part comes from a blog done by a physics teacher called Quantum Progress. Essentially, he had a guest blogger. The sad part is that this blogger, he met a man named Moses Rifkin, and he thinks that this is a brilliant idea. He thinks that this is something that should be encouraged. And I, as a math and physics major, I just can't see why. I mean, even if you did believe in social justice, it has no place in a scientific class. I mean, this whole thing is so absurd. I just can't express it in words. For the first 4 years of my high school teaching career, I felt stuck. I deeply wanted to indoctrinate my children. Make the world a better place. But as a science teacher, my opportunities to do so were limited. Okay, first of all, when you're a science teacher, you're making the biggest change in the world. You are encouraging students to become interested in science. If you do it properly, like rather than focusing on the newest pseudo inequality, let's say if you focused on instead encouraging women to go into sciences, we wouldn't have half of the SJW pseudo problems that we currently have. And apparently he was jealous of the English and history dunderheads who could indoctrinate their students into social justice. This is absolutely absurd. And then he moved to a private school, which, he didn't move to a private school. He was teaching at a private school, and that only made things worse. My students weren't learning about their own privilege. Oh my gosh. Okay, first of all, learning about privilege has no place in a science classroom, nevertheless school. I mean, essentially, I'm not going to pretend that there's not privileges. There are, but they do not exist as SJWs would have you believe. You have privilege based off of socioeconomic advantage, for example. But this disparity, it isn't based off of race. It isn't based off of sex. It isn't based off of sexual orientation. It isn't based off of any of these things. Yes, people who come from upper middle class families will have a leg up, but it is very easy to rise up in this country. I mean, social and upward mobility are so easy in this country that, and I know I'm going to get flack for saying this, but it's almost as if the barriers of lower and upper class don't exist if you're a hard worker. I mean, a specific example that comes to mind, which is from Buckley's book, God and Man at Yale, he is talking about how a colleague of his was sitting at this, essentially they were talking about protesting in universities and 50s and 60s was a very turbulent time in American history, and one of Buckley's colleagues spoke up, and he simply told a story about how he was walking by what do you call it? He walked by a janitor, and the janitor was black, and the janitor said, "Is it true them people's, rioting in New York?" And the professor says, "Yes, well, matter of fact, they are." And the janitor said, "Well, why don't they fire them?" And this entire group of these professors, they were just shocked because they realized how silly it was. Just because you're educated or just because you're going to college doesn't give you a right to riot. Now, I'm sorry for going off on I wouldn't call it a tangent, but I mean, people don't realize how silly they are right now. So the man asks, "What is a science teacher to do?" I don't know, teach science. But no, 10 years later, I have come somewhat closer to finding an answer. I feel like it's an answer because I've found a way to introduce my students to ideas of racial and gender privilege, which has no place in a science classroom. To the idea that our society is our society apparently is far from a meritocracy. Okay, all right. Give me an example of somebody working hard, actually putting effort to rise through the ranks, and not just saying that they're putting effort or not putting effort into the wrong things like trying to become an athlete, but rather putting an effort to learn math and science and engineering to become an engineering major. Because guess what? It's something that most people are capable of doing, but most people are too lazy to do. I know a lot of stupid engineers. They still end up making $150,000. Why or how? Because they put in the effort. So even though they're not all that intelligent, they still manage to get a high-paying job. Why? Because they didn't waste their academic major on something stupid like social justice. Whatever, we don't live in a meritocracy. And to broaden the conception of who racially, gender-wise, etc., does the science to include a much broader slice of society. Now, it's one of those things where society has, science is not about studying society. If it is, it's called social science, and it isn't a hard science, because science is about empiricism. It is about testability. I say somewhat because it's still very much a work in progress. Well, no, duh, and it will ultimately fail, and he's fumbling his way upwards. I would say he's fumbling his way downwards into uncritical thought, essentially. This is so unbelievably dangerous. It's just absurd. I'm just going to show you the assignments that he gives. This is his pre-homework assignment. Essentially, this is to be done on the first day. Pause the video here and read it. That's all I'm not gonna read the entire thing. It's absolutely absurd. So keep in mind, this man he's a physics teacher. And yet he feels the need to bring up who does physics, and then he compares a man who did physics in the 1950s compared to the man now, both of them being African American. This is absolutely absurd. Pause the video here. I am moving on to the next topic. So the first thing that I want to talk about is it starts under being upfront. Let me be transparent. This is a pretty different direction for us to go. Yes, well, it has nothing to do with physics. It has to do with a history study. It has nothing to do with physics other than the fact that the two people you are comparing are physicists. Why? So he talks about you'll have time to learn plenty of textbook physics. The extra time that you have in class that isn't dedicated to textbook physics should be dedicated to real-life applications. And then he goes on to say, but why in a physics class? Because I think that these ideas are cross disciplines. No, they are not. They are not across disciplines. You're trying to turn your physics class into a history class. You're trying to turn it into a joke. And I'm sure that if a student raised his or her hand in a classroom environment and said, well, I happen to disagree with you, Mr. So-and-so. I happen to believe that we live in a meritocracy, and in 2016, I happen to believe that people can get to where they want based off of the effort and work that they put in. The merit, if you will. They merit the things that they get. But no, he's not going to believe that. Hope you guys can take a look at it. I want to get into the rest of his absurd material. Overview of the project. What are we doing? Why are we doing it in a physics class? Now, of course, he lays down ground rules for discussion. Gee, I wonder why. Whatever deed you believe in forbid if somebody's feelings are hurt. This is absolutely absurd. My not so secret agenda. Not everyone may feel like physics might be open to them. It might not only be about ability. Because yes, physics discriminates against race. I'm sure. I'm sure, despite the women and minorities in my quantum mechanics class, apparently it's still somehow racist. This is absolutely ridiculous. Not everyone who is as able to pursue their interests as we, you, independent school students, majority white, just this guy is the reason why there is so much wrong with education. I hope this man gets fired. He goes on explaining the entire hierarchy that feminists talk about. And then next he goes on to explain his homework. The homework entails choosing a hypothesis about the low amount of African American physicists. I mean, I don't know why your homework wouldn't be about physics, maybe explaining the basics of Newtonian mechanics. No. Instead, let's just talk about social justice. This is absolutely ridiculous. I just love the disclaimer at the end of this article. I use black instead of African American because this is used by the National Science Foundation's Women, Minorities, and People with Disabilities report. I recognize this in a simple this guy is just so full of it. Day 2 goes on to discuss stereotypes, and this has absolutely no place in a physics classroom. I feel like I don't need to back that up. I feel like that's understood because one is discussing different race groups and stereotypes. When will that ever come up in a physics class? And the answer to that is never. Unless it's some tangent, never. Usually students are asked to choose one of these quotes and do a short essay on them for day 4 and day 5. And day 4 is on privilege. Once again, no place in a physics classroom. Apparently he wants to make his students feel guilty as if they have original sin for being born white and being born in the middle class, which is absolutely absurd. I'm just going to scroll down rather than pausing it. Here we are. Class discussion. Does this article feel mostly true? What might stop us from seeing... Well, by saying what might stop us from seeing privilege, you're making the assumption that it exists. In what ways does it the entire thing assumes like he doesn't even offer the students, to write that it or argue that it doesn't exist. And this isn't even an English class or a rhetoric class. It's a science class. So I'm just gonna skip. Excuse me. I feel a bit sick. He doesn't even. I'm gonna skip day 5 and day 6. I think we all understand how absurd this is. Day 4 is on privilege, and essentially, he gives the students this article, and they have to discuss one of these quotes and essentially talk about social privilege, which is absurd. I'm just going to scroll down rather than pausing it. By the way, I have noticed that my recorder, it's cutting out the first part of what I say and the last part of everything that I say. I apologize for that. So I'll wait 2 seconds and then start talking. So look, does this article feel mostly true? And then the subsequent question assumes that privilege exists in the form that they discuss it. What might stop us from seeing privilege? I'd like to know what would happen if I was a student in this class and I said, well, privilege doesn't exist. I have a feeling I would be penalized for that. Look at the writing and discussion. In what ways does racial privilege apply in our lives? Well, it doesn't. It simply does not exist. So I'm going to skip day 5 and day 6. You guys can take a look at it yourselves, but it's absolutely absurd. I hope you all realize that. This next thing I find very, very frightening. And essentially, it's an education class. And for those of you who do not know what education classes are, they're classes to essentially train people to become teachers. But this class encourages aspiring teachers to include social justice in math and science. I mean, this is absolutely absurd. Gosh. Essentially, what they start off with, and they're trying to argue for why social justice needs to be taught in the classroom, and it is a very, very, very weak analogy made by an idiot, a complete idiot. Like, and I do mean idiot. I do mean retard. Like, these people are idiots. And for those of you who say I can't say retard, I really don't give a darn. So 67 students and 8 teachers at Oswego High School are going on a field trip to Everson Museum in Syracuse. They need to reserve enough buses, so do the math. How many buses are needed? And the answer that you get from math is 2.5 buses. Well, you guys know what's wrong with that. You can't have half of a bus. What's wrong with this picture? Well, the problem is, even though the mathematics is correct, the understanding of what math means in the context is wrong. Well, gee, no, duh. Mathematics isn't just how we manipulate numbers. It is also what those numbers mean, how we make sense of those numbers, and what processes we use to solve the problem when we use these processes. We don't need 2.5 buses. In fact, we cannot reserve half a bus. Yes, this is remarkably simple. Now, what kind of ridiculous analogy are you going to use? And this is scary. It starts off by saying, well, using word problems to extend projects in science and mathematics classrooms gives us and our students opportunities to appreciate not just the process of mathematics, but the underlying meaning of our mathematical solution. Okay, this much. Up until here, it's been very straightforward. Yes, you need to understand the meaning of math, but meanings of math it's completely different than saying, oh, well, let's use math to promote social justice, because they're two irrelevant things. In other words, teaching for social justice in science and mathematics classrooms allows us to explore, interpret, and reconsider what we understand about mathematics and science. These have no place in mathematics courses. An example of using word problems in mathematics would have to do, for example, modeling how a robot arm would move in a certain vector space using linear algebra. Or perhaps finding the linear charge density in a rod using calculus, or perhaps finding moments of inertia. But it has nothing to do with social justice. I mean, how would you even... Okay, maybe I can think of an example. For those of you who are not familiar with two-slit interference, essentially light acts as a particle when it passes through two slits, right? So you essentially get an interference pattern. Now, what's interesting is if quantum mechanics is based off of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, meaning you either know the position or you know the frequency, wavelength, speed, so on and so forth. You cannot know both at the same time. But and I was saving this for another video, and I'm still going to do a video on it. But when you add a detector on one of the slits, the interference pattern vanishes, and the reason why that is it's all based around Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This is an actual quantum mechanics phenomena. Just look it up. It is called two-slit interference. And when you add a detector, you only end up with two bright fringes instead of multiple ones. And the obvious reason, if we use social justice as our lens, is because the detector is marginalizing the photons. Instead of them being wave-particle fluidic, that's the term I'm going to give it. They're forced to act as a particle or a wave, and in that case, they act as a particle, so they're being marginalized against. Hopefully, you all see the humor in this. It is absolutely absurd. I'm going to show you guys the rubric. First one is geology. What are ores? What are geologic forces that shape their development? How are they used? How are they mined? The social justice context is, what are the associated costs of mining? What are the benefits from mining? And then, of course, what are the social, environmental, and economic consequences associated with mining? This next part annoys me for two reasons. One, look what they give for the study of physics. It just gives you an idea of how little the average person knows about physics. I mean, the fission and fusion of atoms is nuclear energy, and essentially it's such a small part of physics. There's so much more. There's Newtonian mechanics, there's quantum mechanics, although you can't learn that. There's electricity, there's magnetism, there's light, optics, lenses, there's the Doppler effect, wave phenomena, sound, standing wave, simple harmonic motion, just to name a few. And it irritates me that the two things that they can think of, they're both the same thing, which is nuclear physics, which, guess what, an elementary kid isn't going to learn. Now here's what's annoying me. A reminder is on the right is the social justice contextualization. It starts off with an Einstein quote. By the way, Einstein, he was by all means, he was smart. You could call him a genius, but he was pretty ignorant in a lot of his beliefs. He actually said quantum mechanics does not exist, which it does, by the way. It is an indisputable fact that quantum mechanics is a governing set of laws that model the universe. That's indisputable. But anyway, they have this Einstein quote because apparently Einstein is some kind of god for people who do not understand physics, which is ironic because he didn't even believe in a personal god. He wrote a message in 1950s saying that he actually did not believe in God, but that's besides the point. He's some sort of deity to these idiots. And he says, concern for man and his fate must always form the chief interest of all technological endeavors. Never forget the myths of your diagrams and equations. What does this mean in terms of nuclear energy? Well, fun fact, Einstein may have derived the equation for the energy you get from splitting an atom, but he did not do any research on the Manhattan Project. This is just so ridiculous. Explore legitimate and illegitimate uses of nuclear power and justify that does not have anything to do with physics. And what's funny is the other day my physics teacher went on a tangent, and he was talking about nuclear energy, and he said that it was naive for physicists to think that they were going to create a bomb and it wouldn't have been used. And I told him two things. His conclusion was, if you're an engineer and if you work for the Department of Defense, you're going to create something that you regret. Now, I had already worked for Northrop Grumman, and I'm actually very proud of the work that I have done there. And I told the professor two things, and the professor respects me. And he's not liberal by any means. I think he just wanted to put certain things in perspective because most of the students are liberal. He personally is not. And I said, two things, Professor. The dropping of the bombs estimated to save 100,000 American lives. And given the context that we were in, given the atrocities that the Japanese had committed, I think it's completely justified. And two, I worked for Northrop Grumman, and I can't disclose what I've done there, but I only feel pride for the work that I've done. And I can completely live with it killing terrorists. I have absolutely no regrets. I mean, what I did helped protect American lives, the lives of U.S. troops, and I have absolutely no regrets for any of that. It goes on to economics and power of physics. Let's just move on to the next three things entail math, so I'm going to group them all together. Division. I mean, how can division possibly have an SJW context? What's the difference between equality and equity, and what does it mean to be fair? I mean, what? I mean, the only thing that I can think of is them bringing up, did you know that African Americans were thought to be 3/5 of a person, which actually wasn't true. It was the 3/5 compromise involved just representation for southern states. So it's absolutely absurd. But African Americans were never viewed as 3/5 of a person. Just to be clear, it was just so that they could get more delegates. But I mean, what do those two things have to do with fractions? And that's absolutely nothing. Look at averages. What do averages really tell us? Well, I feel like that's clear. It's the average. What information is lost, obscured, or hidden when we talk about the average? Is anyone average? No one is average, but I want to go back to the second point. What information is lost, obscured, or hidden when we talk about the average? Well, no information is... Oh, I have a great example. You want to know what's distorted when we use the average? It's called the gender pay gap. So yes, information is lost. And it has to do with that horrid 77 cents on the dollar figure. I mean, come on. Percents. How do different types of taxes differently impact different people? That has nothing to do with percents. It has to do with I suppose it has something to do with percents. Now, one of the things you need to realize is we have something called a progressive tax rate in the United States. If you're not familiar with it, you can look up a chart. And essentially, as you make more and more, you go up a tax bracket, which means, for example, let's say at $50,000, I'm taxed 15%, and then at above $50,000, I'm taxed 30%. Essentially, I'm taxed 15% of the $50,000, and then everything I make above that, I am taxed 30%. That's an example of progressive tax. So our tax system is actually very, very fair, but SJWs don't think so. Scary. It has to do with teaching science and social justice in secondary schools. It starts off prior experience incorporating social justice into your science curriculum. It just shouldn't exist in science. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, so I'm just going to go on to the rest of this presentation. So the reason why this first part is ridiculous is the girls of Atomic City. So for those of you who don't know, essentially a boarding school, a boys' boarding school was closed down, and they were told to leave, and essentially a whole bunch of scientists work there on the Manhattan Project, and they eventually moved to a bigger facility. But women, there were very few or no female scientists working on this. It was predominantly dominated by males, so I don't know why you'd even want to talk about this. And obviously, it has nothing to do in a science classroom other than a side note. This part is a photo essay, and they want you to put sticky notes on what caused this. And I'm just going to scroll down here. Whoops, scroll down too much. My bad. Now I see why I paused it and everything. What caused this? Oh, science. It's not like there was a war going on or anything. I mean, and once again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. But when I was talking about this with my professor, he knew at least I was consistent with my viewpoints. I don't think he was against the dropping of the bombs. He just wanted to, there are repercussions for research. I mean, there's nothing wrong with... We were at war, and the Japanese had committed so many atrocities They had killed so many civilians on Okinawa, and they had killed so many service members on Pearl Harbor, and they treated our servicemen so horribly that this was the quickest way to end the war and the right way to end the war, to save 100,000 American lives or more. This is just scary. It's learner centered and teaches the teacher to be the facilitator. I mean, what if a student simply doesn't agree with this worldview? I mean, it's like they ignore that as a possibility. Have problems with any of this, just email these two people. I'm not sure what YouTube's policy is on on me putting emails on the site, but at this point I simply do not care. This was public. They did put their email in a public domain, so I feel like they want you to email them, given that this was online. This is absolutely ridiculous. That's all I have for today. I'm sorry this video kind of dragged on quite a bit for just those three sources. But this stuff is absolutely absurd. I mean, one of the things is they discussed physics, in a social justice context, right? And I can't help but thinking to myself, and once again, I was going to do this in a later video, but for those of you who do not understand how special relativity works, essentially, because nothing can travel at the speed of light, time values and distance values literally change depending on what frame you're in. And I'm going to make a video that makes fun of that, going, oh, well, you see what happens is that particle is traveling too fast to the Earth, so essentially the Earth's safe space for it becomes bigger, and that's why it experiences a smaller distance traveling to the Earth than the Earth does for it traveling towards the Earth. Once again, I guess that's a fairly advanced physics concept. I'll explain it in more depth in a later video. But this is absolutely absurd. Social justice has no context in a science classroom. Now, I'm going to do another video on just social justice and how it has no place in the classroom because it's a worldview, and it's uncritical by nature. But for now, I just wanted to focus on science classrooms because everybody understands that science is based off of testability and empiricism, two factors which social justice has never had. So that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Once again, I'm sorry for ranting on, but I think that all of the information was relatively important. If you enjoy the videos, subscribe, share them. I'm trying to expand this channel, and that's all I have for today. I will not be creating another video today simply because I'm so busy. I have 4 midterms coming up next week, by the way, to be clear. I have a quantum mechanics, 2 advanced math courses, and I have another class that has a midterm. I'm sorry, I can't recall the class at the moment. You all have a good day. Once again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.